Every American kitchen in 1955 had the same secret ingredient sitting in the cupboard. A little red and white can of Campbell's soup that built more family dinners than any other product in American food history. 40 million American homes opened that can every single week. It was the heart of the most famous holiday side dish ever invented. It turned cheap beef tender, made plain chicken special, and stretched a single pound of ground meat across a whole hungry family for under $1. If you grew up between 1955 and 1979, you already know that smell. The cream of mushroom bubbling in the oven. The casserole your mother pulled out on a Friday night. These are 25 recipes from old Campbell's cookbooks that nobody makes anymore. The forgotten dishes that fed American families for 40 years. Subscribe before we begin. The countdown starts now. Pork chop mushroom bake. The Sunday supper that took the cheapest pork chops and a can of cream of mushroom soup and turned them into something tender enough to cut with a fork. A can of cream of mushroom soup cost 12 cents in 1958. Today, around $1.29. Pork chops, onion, and rice. Total then under $1.50. Today, under $9. Fed 4. You brown the pork chops in a skillet. You spread rice in a baking dish. You mix the soup with water and pour it over the rice. You lay the chops on top. You cover and bake at 350 for 1 hour. The chops go fork tender. The rice absorbs the mushroom soup. The whole dish goes golden and creamy. The pork chop mushroom bake appeared in Campbell's cookbooks in the 1950s. By 1958, it was a Sunday supper standard in working-class American homes. Cheap chops made tender. A can of soup made it possible. Tomato soup meatloaf. The meatloaf that used a can of tomato soup instead of ketchup and produced something moister and richer than any other meatloaf in the neighborhood. The Campbell's twist that every grandmother swore by. A can of tomato soup cost 10 cents in 1958. Today, around $1.19. Ground beef, an egg, breadcrumbs, and onion. Total then under $1. Today, under $8. Fed 6. You mix ground beef with half the tomato soup, an egg, breadcrumbs, and grated onion. You press it into a loaf pan. You spread the rest of the soup over the top. You bake at 350 for 1 hour. The top goes dark and glossy. The loaf stays moist from the soup. The kitchen smells like a Sunday supper. The tomato soup meatloaf appeared on Campbell's tomato soup labels in the 1950s and spread through every American home cookbook of the era. By 1958, it was a weeknight standard coast to coast. Cold on white bread the next day was almost better than the first night. Chicken rice bake. The hands-off Sunday supper that assembled itself in one dish. A can of cream of mushroom soup, rice, and chicken, all baked together until the rice went creamy and the chicken fell off the bone. A can of cream of mushroom soup cost 12 cents in 1957. Today, around $1.29. Chicken pieces, rice, water, and onion soup mix. Total then under $1.50. Today, under $9. Fed 6. You spread dry rice in a baking dish. You mix the soup with water and pour it over. You lay chicken pieces on top. You cover with foil. You bake at 375 for 90 minutes. The rice absorbs the soup and goes creamy. The chicken falls off the bone. The whole dish goes golden. The chicken rice bake appeared in Campbell's recipe pamphlets in the 1950s and spread through Betty Crocker recipe cards. By 1957, it was a Sunday standard in American homes everywhere. No stirring, no watching. The oven did everything while she rested. Glorified chicken. The recipe that made plain baked chicken feel special with nothing more than a can of cream of mushroom soup poured over the top. The name said everything about the era's faith in canned soup. A can of cream of mushroom soup cost 12 cents in 1958. Today, around $1.29. Chicken pieces, paprika, and butter. Total then under $1. Today under $8. Fed 5. You arrange chicken pieces in a baking dish. You dot them with butter and dust with paprika. You pour cream of mushroom soup over the top. You bake at 375 for 1 hour until the chicken is tender and the soup browns. The soup goes golden and bubbling. The chicken stays moist underneath. The paprika gives it color. Glorified chicken appeared in Campbell's cookbooks in the 1950s as proof that a can of soup could elevate the plainest meal. By 1958, it was a weeknight standard nationwide. A can of soup that turned plain chicken into something the family asked for again.
Superburger sandwiches. The Campbell's answer to the Sloppy Joe. A can of vegetable soup stirred into browned ground beef and spooned onto buns. Cheaper and faster than anything else on the table. A can of vegetable soup cost 12 cents in 1959. Today, around $1.29. Ground beef, onion, mustard, and hamburger buns. Total then under $1. Today, under $7. Fed 6. You brown ground beef with onion. You drain the fat. You stir in vegetable soup and a spoon of mustard. You simmer 10 minutes until thick. You spoon it onto toasted buns. The filling goes thick and savory. The vegetables from the soup add body. The buns soak up the sauce. Superburgers appeared in Campbell's recipe pamphlets in the late 1950s as a quick weeknight sandwich. By 1959, they were a working-class supper standard across the country. 1 can, a pound of beef, 6 children fed in 15 minutes. Here is something nobody says out loud. The can of soup was not a shortcut. It was a working mother's permission to feed her family well on a night she had nothing left to give. Green bean casserole, the most famous Campbell's recipe ever created. The dish that appeared on more American holiday tables than any other, and that almost nobody makes from the original recipe anymore. A can of cream of mushroom soup cost 12 cents in 1955. Today, around $1.29. Green beans, milk, soy sauce, and French's fried onions. Total then under 50 cents. Today, under $5. Fed 8. You mix cream of mushroom soup with milk, soy sauce, and pepper. You stir in cooked green beans and half the fried onions. You pour it into a baking dish. You bake at 350 for 25 minutes. You scatter the rest of the onions on top and bake 5 minutes more. The casserole bubbles at the edges. The onions go crisp and golden. The sauce coats every bean. Green bean casserole was invented by Dorcas Riley in the Campbell's test kitchen in Camden, New Jersey in 1955. By 1960, it was the single most requested holiday side dish in America. 40 million tables. 1 12-cent can. The most American recipe ever printed on a label. Tuna noodle casserole. The Friday night supper that defined Campbell's cooking for an entire generation of American families. A can of cream of mushroom soup, a can of tuna, and a bag of egg noodles. Done. A can of cream of mushroom soup cost 12 cents in 1956. Today, around $1.29. Tuna, egg noodles, peas, and potato chips. Total then under $1. Today, under $7. Fed 6. You mix the soup with milk. You fold in cooked noodles, drained tuna, and peas. You pour it into a baking dish. You crush potato chips over the top. You bake at 375 for 25 minutes. The casserole bubbles. The chip topping goes crisp and golden. The tuna breaks into tender flakes throughout. Tuna noodle casserole spread through Campbell's recipe pamphlets in the 1940s and 1950s and became the universal American Friday supper, especially in Catholic households. By 1956, it was on tables coast to coast. The potato chip topping was the detail that made the children fight over the corners. Mushroom soup Swiss steak. The tough, cheap round steak braised in a can of cream of mushroom soup until it surrendered into something that tasted like a far more expensive cut.
A can of cream of mushroom soup cost 12 cents in 1959. Today, around $1.29. Round steak, onion, and flour. Total then under $1. Today, under $8. Fed 4. You pound flour into the round steak. You brown it hard in a skillet. You add sliced onion. You pour the soup over the top with a little water. You cover and simmer 90 minutes until the steak goes tender. The gravy goes thick and rich. The steak goes completely fork tender. The onions melt into the sauce. Mushroom soup Swiss steak appeared in Campbell's recipe pamphlets in the 1950s as a way to make cheap beef tender. By 1959, it was a weeknight standard across working-class America. The toughest steak in the case. The cheapest can on the shelf. A tender Sunday supper. Celery soup scalloped potatoes. The side dish that skipped the fussy white sauce and used a can of cream of celery soup instead. Faster, easier, and just as creamy as the version that took 3 times the work. A can of cream of celery soup cost 12 cents in 1957. Today, around $1.29. Potatoes, milk, onion, and cheddar. Total then under 60 cents. Today, under $5. Fed 6. You slice potatoes thin. You mix the celery soup with milk. You layer potatoes, onion, and the soup mixture in a baking dish. You top with cheddar. You bake at 375 for 1 hour. The potatoes go tender and creamy. The cheese melts on top. The celery soup binds everything together. Celery soup scalloped potatoes appeared in Campbell's cookbooks in the 1950s as the shortcut version of the classic. By 1957, it was a holiday and Sunday side dish standard nationwide.
Chicken noodle soup bake. The casserole that turned a can of chicken noodle soup into a full-baked supper with the addition of more chicken and a crunchy topping. A can of chicken noodle soup cost 12 cents in 1958. Today, around $1.29. Cooked chicken, egg noodles, peas, and breadcrumbs. Total then under $1. Today, under $7. Fed 5. You mix chicken noodle soup with cooked chicken, extra noodles, and peas. You pour it into a baking dish. You top with buttered breadcrumbs. You bake at 375 for 25 minutes. The casserole bubbles. The breadcrumbs go golden. The chicken and noodles soak up the broth. The chicken noodle soup bake appeared in Campbell's pamphlets in the 1950s. By 1958, it was a weeknight standard in working-class American homes. A can of soup turned into a full-baked dinner. Bean soup Frankfurter bake. The supper that combined a can of bean soup with sliced franks into a hearty baked dish that fed a family of 6 for under $1. A can of bean soup cost 12 cents in 1959. Today, around $1.29. Frankfurters, onion, brown sugar, and mustard. Total then under $1. Today, under $7. Fed 6. You slice franks into coins. You mix bean soup with brown sugar, mustard, and onion. You stir in the franks. You pour it into a baking dish. You bake at 375 for 30 minutes. The beans go thick and glossy. The franks plump and brown. The sauce turns dark and sweet. The bean soup Frankfurter bake appeared in Campbell's cookbooks in the 1950s as a budget supper. By 1959, it was a working-class weeknight standard nationwide. A can of beans and a pack of franks. A whole family fed for pocket change. Golden mushroom pot roast. The Sunday pot roast that used a can of golden mushroom soup to create a rich, dark gravy without any effort beyond opening the can. A can of golden mushroom soup cost 14 cents in 1960. Today, around $1.49. A chuck roast, onion, and carrots. Total then under $2. Today under $20. Fed 8. You brown the roast in a Dutch oven. You add onion and carrots. You pour the golden mushroom soup over the top with a little water. You cover and bake at 325 for 3 hours. The roast collapses into the gravy. The soup creates a dark, rich sauce. The vegetables go tender. Golden mushroom pot roast appeared in Campbell's cookbooks in the late 1950s. By 1960, it was a Sunday dinner standard in American homes everywhere. One can created a gravy that tasted like it took all day. Here is where things get personal. You did not love the recipe. You loved the smell of it baking on a Sunday, and the woman who opened that can because she loved you. Super rice skillet. The one-pan weeknight dinner that combined a can of soup, rice, and ground beef into a complete meal cooked entirely on the stovetop. A can of tomato soup cost 10 cents in 1961. Today, around $1.19. Ground beef, rice, onion, and water. Total then under $1. Today, under $7. Fed 5. You brown ground beef with onion. You stir in dry rice, tomato soup, and water. You cover and simmer 20 minutes until the rice goes tender. The rice absorbs the tomato soup. The beef settles into every grain. The whole skillet goes red and savory. The super rice skillet appeared in Campbell's pamphlets in the early 1960s as a one-pan supper. By 1961, it was a weeknight standard in working-class homes nationwide. One pan, one can, 20 minutes. Dinner solved. Cheddar cheese soup broccoli bake. The vegetable casserole that used a can of cheddar cheese soup to make broccoli something children would actually eat without complaint. A can of cheddar cheese soup cost 14 cents in 1962. Today, around $1.49. Broccoli, rice, and breadcrumbs. Total then under 60 cents. Today, under $5. Fed 6. You cook broccoli until just tender. You mix it with cooked rice and cheddar cheese soup. You pour it into a baking dish. You top with breadcrumbs. You bake at 375 for 25 minutes. The casserole goes creamy and golden. The cheese soup coats the broccoli. The breadcrumbs crisp on top. The cheddar cheese soup broccoli bake appeared in Campbell's cookbooks in the early 1960s. By 1962, it was a weeknight vegetable side standard nationwide. A can of cheese soup made broccoli disappear from children's plates. One dish chicken and stuffing bake. The complete Sunday dinner in a single dish. Chicken, stuffing, and a can of cream of chicken soup baked together into something that tasted like Thanksgiving on an ordinary day. A can of cream of chicken soup cost 12 cents in 1963. Today, around $1.29. Chicken pieces, stuffing mix, and butter. Total then under $1.50. Today under $9. Fed 6. You arrange chicken in a baking dish. You pour the cream of chicken soup over it. You top with prepared stuffing. You dot with butter. You bake at 375 for 1 hour. The chicken goes tender. Tomato soup Sloppy Joes. The Sloppy Joe made with a can of tomato soup instead of a special sauce. Faster, cheaper, and exactly as good as anything from a packet. A can of tomato soup cost 10 cents in 1962. Today, around $1.19. Ground beef, onion, mustard, and buns. Total then under $1. Today, under $7. Fed 6. You brown ground beef with onion. You drain the fat. You stir in tomato soup, mustard, and a little brown sugar. You simmer 10 minutes. You spoon it onto buns. The filling goes thick and tangy. The tomato soup makes it rich. The buns soak up the sauce. Tomato soup sloppy joes appeared on Campbell's labels in the 1950s and 1960s. By 1962, they were a weeknight standard in working-class American homes. One can replaced an entire packet of seasoning and tasted better. Super mac and cheese. The macaroni and cheese made richer and creamier with a can of cheddar cheese soup stirred into the sauce. The Campbell's upgrade to a children's favorite. A can of cheddar cheese soup cost 14 cents in 1961. Today, around $1.49. Macaroni, cheddar, milk, and breadcrumbs. Total then under 60 cents. Today, under $5. Fed 6. You boil macaroni and drain it. You mix it with cheddar cheese soup, shredded cheddar, and milk. You pour it into a baking dish. You top with breadcrumbs. You bake at 375 for 25 minutes. The sauce goes extra creamy. The cheese soup deepens the flavor. The top goes golden and crisp. Super mac and cheese appeared in Campbell's cookbooks in the 1960s as a richer version of the classic. By 1961, it was a children's dinner standard nationwide. A can of cheese soup made the creamiest macaroni in the neighborhood. Vegetable soup beef stew. The shortcut stew that used a can of vegetable soup as the base, turning leftover beef and a few potatoes into a full pot of stew in under an hour. A can of vegetable soup cost 12 cents in 1960. Today, around $1.29. Stew, beef, potatoes, and onion. Total then under $1.50. Today, under $10. Fed 6. You brown stew beef with onion. You add potatoes, vegetable soup, and a little water. You cover and simmer 45 minutes until the beef goes tender. The broth goes rich from the soup. The beef softens. The potatoes thicken everything. Vegetable soup beef stew appeared in Campbell's pamphlets in the 1950s as a fast stew shortcut. By 1960, it was a weeknight standard in working-class homes. A can of soup turned leftover beef into a full pot of stew. Here is what nobody tells you. That little red and white can fed more American families than any restaurant ever did. It deserves more respect than it gets. Cream of chicken biscuit bake. The supper that topped a creamy chicken filling with biscuits and baked it into a cobbler-style dinner that fed a family for almost nothing. A can of cream of chicken soup cost 12 cents in 1962. Today, around $1.29. Cooked chicken, peas, and canned biscuits. Total then under $1.50. Today, under $8. Fed 5. You mix cream of chicken soup with cooked chicken, peas, and a little milk. You pour it into a baking dish. You arrange canned biscuits on top. You bake at 400 for 25 minutes until the biscuits go golden. The filling bubbles underneath. The biscuits rise golden and flaky. The chicken soaks into everything. The cream of chicken biscuit bake appeared in Campbell's cookbooks in the 1960s. By 1962, it was a weeknight comfort supper standard nationwide. A pot pie without the work of a crust. One can made it possible. Super enchiladas. The Tex-Mex casserole made the Campbell's way, using a can of cheddar cheese soup and a can of tomato soup to build a quick enchilada bake. A can of cheddar cheese soup cost 14 cents in 1963. Today, around $1.49. Tortillas, ground beef, tomato soup, and onion. Total then under $1.50. Today, under $9. Fed 6. You brown ground beef with onion. You mix the two soups together.
You layer tortillas, beef, and soup in a baking dish. You top with cheese. You bake at 375 for 30 minutes. The tortillas soften into the sauce. The cheese melts through. The two soups create a creamy, tangy sauce. Super enchiladas appeared in Campbell's cookbooks in the 1960s as an easy Tex-Mex shortcut. By 1963, they were a weeknight standard in homes across the Southwest and beyond. 2 cans of soup made an enchilada bake without a single homemade sauce. Cheeseburger soup casserole. The casserole that captured the flavor of a cheeseburger in a baked dish, built on a can of cheddar cheese soup and a pound of ground beef. A can of cheddar cheese soup cost 14 cents in 1964. Today, around $1.49. Ground beef, potatoes, onion, and cheddar. Total then under $1. Today, under $8. Fed 6. You brown ground beef with onion. You mix it with diced potatoes and cheddar cheese soup. You pour it into a baking dish.
Tuna tomato bake. The Friday supper variation that used tomato soup instead of mushroom, giving the classic tuna casserole a brighter, tangier flavor. A can of tomato soup cost 10 cents in 1961. Today, around $1.19. Tuna, macaroni, onion, and cheddar. Total then under $1. Today, under $7. Fed 5. You boil macaroni and drain it. You mix it with tomato soup, drained tuna, and onion. You pour it into a baking dish. You top with cheddar. You bake at 375 for 25 minutes. The macaroni absorbs the tomato. The tuna flakes throughout. The cheese melts on top. The tuna tomato bake appeared in Campbell's pamphlets in the 1950s and 1960s as a variation on the classic. By 1961, it was a Friday supper standard nationwide. The tomato soup version that fans swore was better than the mushroom original. Tomato soup spice cake. The most surprising recipe in any Campbell's cookbook. A spice cake made with a can of tomato soup that nobody could identify and everybody asked about. A can of tomato soup cost 10 cents in 1960. Today, around $1.19. Flour, sugar, spices, baking soda, and raisins. Total then under 50 cents. Today, under $4. Fed 12. You mix tomato soup with flour, sugar, cinnamon, cloves, baking soda, and raisins. You pour it into a cake pan. You bake at 350 for 45 minutes. The cake goes dark and moist. The spices fill the kitchen. Nobody can guess the secret ingredient. The tomato soup spice cake appeared on Campbell's tomato soup labels starting in the 1920s and remained a beloved curiosity through the 1970s. By 1960, it was a famous American novelty cake nationwide. A can of tomato soup in a cake, and it worked every single time.